For centuries on all continents, folks have been fermenting and distilling spirits. Our spirits are handmade.
Everything begins here. We start with organic wheat and corn in 50-pound sacks. We also use a distiller's malt. And we like to say that's the only shortcut that we take, is that we don't actually grow the grains. After they arrive here, every single thing that happens and every single step of the process, we shepherd from here until when it goes into the bottle and leaves to go to the ABC. We'll actually fill this piece of equipment up, which is called the mash tank, with hot water from there, about 2/3 full, and then we'll start to mill the grains here and send them over into the mash tank. The grain that we use is primarily organic. We use organic wheat and organic corn. We get it here regionally. We also use a distiller's malt. The reason we use those is just to make sure that we start with the purest ingredients possible to match in purity the process that we use with the raw ingredient. We use a number 2 field corn, which is a very, very clean corn, same way with the wheat and the barley. And, that's why one of the reasons we have them on display here at the distillery for people to see how clean it actually comes to us in the bag. And so we use primarily organic ingredients. We use regional ingredients. We don't buy stuff from California. We buy stuff as close to home as humanly possible. There's a rod through the center of that with 3 agitators that constantly spin. And so after about 5 hours, what we have is a big grain mixture in there, which serves as our sugar, our starch source.
3 things happen where you get gelatinization, liquefaction, and saccharification. And those are fancy terms for a process of turning starch into sugar. We ramp this sucker up to 90 degrees Celsius, and hold it for a certain amount of time, and then we bring it back to 60 degrees, and then we add our malt, and we bring it back down to 30 degrees. All those processes are basically just trying to create a flavored sugar slurry. And of course, sugar is what the yeast eats to turn into alcohol. When we cook it in this tank right here, we're basically just making whatever recipe we're using, whether it's corn and wheat and barley, or whether it's corn, or whether it's on rye, or whatever we're using. The goal is to turn the starch in that grain into sugar.
The moonshine guys didn't have this. They went straight to the sugar. They'd have a 50-pound bag of granulated sugar, liquefy it, heat it up, and then put their yeast into that. When you're up in the mountains with a creek getting shot at and worried about somebody finding you skipped this piece of equipment totally and went straight to the sugar. That's why some moonshine tastes great and some moonshine tastes like gasoline. But we start, and most small distillers start straight from the grain like this, of whatever their grain source. With us on the vodka, it happens to be corn, wheat, and barley. So we'll cook that for about 6 hours, and then we'll cool it down. This gunmetal gray section here that you see is actually a cooling jacket. And what we'll do is when we're ready to cool it down, we'll pump cold water into this that just circulates around the tank, pulls the heat off, and then exits in the back as warm water. 85% of what we put down the drain is just warm water. We don't waste very much, and we don't really put any of our waste or stillage down the drain. I'll explain more about that in a second. But we try and we're not perfect, but we try and be as green as possible with what we do. So that's about 5.5, 6 hours. We cool it down, we pitch yeast into it, and again, with those pumps, we'll move it over to one of these 2 fermenters, where it will sit for about 5 days and ferment. Now, as a result of fermentation, you have two things. One is heat production as part of the chemical reaction. You'll see that these both have cooling jackets on the back of them. Same principle, we'll cool them down. If the fermentation gets too hot, it starts to have negative effects. So we have a way to control that heat. Also, if you come over here, you'll see on the side this exhaust pipe. The other side effect of fermentation is CO2 production. So we let it escape in a simple vapor lock. It's also a visual monitor for us because when it stops bubbling, it stops producing CO2 and it's done. When it stops producing CO2, all the fermentation that's going to happen has. So after about 5 days, that's about 10 to 12% alcohol, and we pump it then from the fermentation tank over to the kettle. So that's actually a little bit warm. But you can see in there, it's essentially a big copper double boiler. And of course, the whole principle of distillation is that alcohol turns to a vapor at a lower temperature than water does. So when you have any kind of water-alcohol mixture, you get it to just below boiling, about 200 degrees, and everything else stays in the kettle while the alcohol turns to a vapor and passes over. And depending on whether we're making brown liquors or white liquors, we'll use one or some combination of these columns, which are called rectification columns. What happens is behind each one of these sight glasses is a rectification plate that allows the vapor to travel through there, and as it goes up through the column, it'll get higher in alcohol percentage, it'll also get better in quality. Everything will go either from the kettle to the small column or to the tall column, and then from either one of those columns to the condenser and then back into a liquid. The column on the right, the small column, is used for whiskey and used on the stripping runs. The very tall column at the end with 19 plates is for vodka and gin, for the really clear, refined liquid. It will eventually travel to this piece, the stainless steel piece, which is the condenser, which is essentially a cold water radiator, which then turns that vapor back into a liquid, which will come out here. That's called a parrot, and the liquid will sit in there, and that's where John and I taste it and smell it and determine the qualities of when we want to start bottling it. We don't bottle everything that comes off the still, which is one of the ways that we can make an alcohol that's as good or better as some of the big guys that have been doing it forever and ever.
We picked this equipment from a company called Christian Carl, and the reason we picked that equipment is that Christian Carl has been a producer of distillation and brewing equipment for 141 years. So they've been making small farm stills for a long time. There's a company over in Kentucky that produces stills, but they really cater to the big guys, the Jim Beams, the Jack Daniels of the world. Christian Carl really focuses on the small guys, walking us through the process and also coming in here to help set up the equipment, showing you how the distillation process works, showing you how the mashing process works, and really walking you through the whole thing, sort of holding your hand a little bit through this process. And the equipment's also beautiful, so that's sort of the reason why we chose this equipment over someone else. This is the Rolls Royce of this distillation equipment for sure. It's spectacular, works spectacular, good stuff.
First part of a distillation run is called the heads, and it's very high in alcohol percentage, but it's very low in character. It smells a lot like paint thinner most of the time. If I hand you a bottle of it right now, you'd instantly know, based just on the nose of it, that you wouldn't want to drink it. So we separate that out. The middle section, which is the best section, is called the hearts. That's got the best character, the best flavors, and very few impurities compared to the front and the back. The back is called the tails, and again, we separate that out. The tails are created when the kettle really has most of the water and everything that can't be turned into a gas left in it. So it's the opposite of the heads. It's very low in alcohol, but it's very high in character, and that's a bad thing. There's too much stuff in it. It's like the bottom of a pot of coffee. Too much in it. So we actually separate those two and only bottle what's called the hearts, or that middle section. And that is basically the tenderloin of it. It's the best part of it. That's one of the reasons that we can make a spirit as good and as smooth as anybody anywhere, because, you know, most of the big guys have some sort of distillation or filtration method that tries to approximate what John does by coming over here and tasting it. And that is always a failed system, no matter how good it is.
The way gin is actually made is you'll take your neutral base, put it into the still or into a container. Most people use what they call a cold compounding recipe. Take their neutral base, put all the botanicals in it, stick it in the still, or put the botanicals in the still, let it soak, and distill it over, and those flavors come through. That cold compounding recipe creates a heavier spirit. We actually use a process called vapor infusion. So at the top of our helmet, you see there's a little handle up there on the top of our helmet. There's a little metal basket that sits on the top of there, and we basically put all our botanicals in a cheesecloth bag, and just the vapor carries that flavor over.
One of the qualifications for bourbon is that it be aged at a new charred white oak barrel. The smaller barrel you use, the quicker it matures. So we started with 10-gallon barrels at the beginning, Whiskey generally ages about 40 days per gallon, so the 10-gallon barrel will be ready approximately 400 days after we put it in. We'll pull those out in April of 2011. They'll be ready, and then we moved up to a 15-gallon barrel, a 30-gallon barrel, and then these big ones are the 53-gallon barrels, and that's what the big boys use pretty well exclusively. One of the reasons that West Virginia is a good place for bourbon is the same reason that Kentucky is. We're a huge piece of limestone, so no matter what water you get, it's been filtered through some sort of natural limestone before it comes to you. And also we have 4 really well-defined seasons, just like Kentucky does. This is called a rick house. And you'll see it's not insulated, so it will get very hot in the summertime and very cold in the wintertime. And that, at this volume, helps that alcohol expand and contract and move in and out of that charcoal and move in and out of that oak, which is what helps it mellow and helps it age and helps it sort of get that buttery caramel flavor that a lot of bourbons have. The stillage, which is what's left from the fermentation mash after we pulled the alcohol off of it, it's basically just a soupy, grainy mixture. We give that to a farmer here who uses it both for compost and for feeding his cows. They'll actually learn to drink it.
Well, I wish you could have been there for the first time that they tried it. Now, that was what was really funny. I mean, it was like one ventured up, stuck his tongue in it, wallered his tongue around a little bit. Hey, I don't know what the hell it is. You know, that's not bad. So then he tried another couple of licks. Well, you think they don't communicate? It wasn't 5 minutes though. Here comes 4 or 5 more. Then the rest of them see what these 6 or 8 are doing up there. So they got to come to see. So I had the whole crowd up there pretty quick.
Organic grains, purified mountain water, the best equipment in the world, monitored fermenting and distilling, triple distilled, double filtered, premium cut. Liquor was never made any better, anywhere, anytime than Smooth Ambler does now here in the Greenbrier Valley of West Virginia. Our production and aging areas are built to provide the best possible conditions for the best possible product. Our visitors area are designed for you to enjoy. Come back often, bring your friends and your family. It is a fact that smooth Ambler spirits are produced at the highest and purest level possible anywhere in the world.